pleasure for me as a longtime fan to be sitting here with Aaron Gray.
Here with Larry Hama.
We're talking with Kevin J. Anderson, best-selling author.
Mr. Neil Adams.
I am here with David Friend.
Axel Alonso, editor.
Shadow Stevens.
At Devil's Comic-Con with John Delancey.
With Tom King.
Kevin Conroy.
Free comic book day.
Denise Crosby.
PopCon Pop Expo.
Here on location at Star Wars Celebration.
Cafe Expo, talking for our second time with Gil Gerard.
Wichita, Kansas at Time Eddie.
Producer David Gerald.
I've got Eric Flint.
Are here at Smallville Comic-Con.
Wizard World St. Louis.
VillageCon in Bentonville, Arkansas.
Michael Lombardi. We were talking with Alan Dean.
Quincy Allen.
Suzanne Lambden.
Of Starlog Magazine, Mr. Kerry Oakwell.
Chris Sami.
Landon Lee. Dave Schwartz.
Mano Intirami.
Jason Aaron.
This is Sci-Fi for Me, your portal to the science fiction multiverse.
And good evening, everybody. I am RJ Carter, Senior Managing Editor here at CriticalBlast.com, Chief Envelope Licker for Critical Blast Logistics, myopic proofreader for Critical Blast Publishing, and I do consult with you with your crowdfunding data, putting my 35 years of IT experience to your behest. It's time for another joint venture between Critical Blast and Sci-Fi for Me, and joining me tonight, Christopher Hoffman. Tried to say both your names at one time. That didn't come out of the mouth at all.
Oh, yeah.
Christopher, how are you tonight, man?
I'm doing fine, RJ. How are you, sir?
I am primed and ready. I spent the day with Mr. Boss, going through, digging through boxes. I took him to a used bookstore in Springdale, Arkansas, Once Upon a Time Books.
Oh, wow.
I said, they got some classic sci-fi and some ancient. He bought an 1875 copy of something. I don't know what it is, but he was drooling over it. And while we were there looking at the shelves, the young ladies who ran the place said, we have boxes that we haven't put on the shelf yet. 3 crates of paperback sci-fi. He was literally stacked up in both hands like this.
Oh, that's great. That would be a version of heaven for me. I think it's like going through old bookstores and digging out the hidden treasures. We had a bookstore in San Antonio, Texas, or we still do. Last time I was there, called 9 Lives, and I was able to find this really interesting hardback book. It's on my bookshelf. I would grab it, but it was The Art of Torture. And it was actually a history of various like Iron Maidens and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, I think I will pick this up for my collection because it's so odd. It's great when you can find like really interesting stuff like that.
I love the odd books. I couldn't resist this. Oh, the glare is just gonna be awful because it's in a binder. I got a copy of Carson of Venus.
Oh, wow.
That is just, I don't know how old this is. I haven't taken it out of the little Mylar, but
it looks to be in good condition considering, and it's, I don't know, maybe 60, 70, somewhere around there.
Yeah, and then The Moon Maid by Edgar Rice Burroughs. So that was the stuff I was looking for. I did get one, because I'm a comic book guy, so I saw one that was comic book-ish. Well, it was comic book. The Al Williamson Flash Gordons on the Lost Continent of Mongo.
Oh, wow.
So I believe that is a graphic novel throughout in digest form. That's going to be fun. But not as much fun as we're going to have tonight. Speaking with our guest, who we're going to be bringing on here now, author and noted ufologist, or is it ufologist? I don't know. We're going to find out. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome with us to the show, Dr. Michael Brein. We have a wonderful studio audience here.
It's nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you for coming on. You had reached out to us to me through email about the series of books that you're working on, and Jason was asking me, do you have anybody else who might be a good guest for Blast from the Bunker? We could do it again. I'm like, yep, I think I do now. So,
well, since you collect old books,
yes.
I like to say I'm sort of a living relic of the modern UFO era, because when Kenneth Arnold flew his airplane across the mountains in Washington State, I was about 6 years old. So I was just coming into the modern era of flying saucers from then to the present day. So I think I have a little bit of interesting experience under my belt along these lines.
Is that what hooked you? Because I was going to ask that. Christopher, you go ahead. Jump.
Oh, no,
I will talk.
In fact, you've got 4 different volumes, and you've collected, I believe, 2 or close to 2,000, or maybe over 2,000 accounts of UFO like sightings, as well as paranormal experience.
Well, let me clarify that a little bit.
Okay, sure.
This might sound a little odd, but I'm the world's first travel psychologist, if you will. I actually decided to do my doctoral work in psychology on the psychology of travel because I was bitten in the okoli, which is the Hawaiian word for rear-end. I was bitten by the travel bug, loved travel, and wanted to understand it better. And my thought was, well, what's a good way to study the psychology of travel or the psychology of anything? And I thought, well, why don't I ask people about it? So I started interviewing people, and I had somewhere up as many as 1,500 to 2,000 interviews, a huge chunk of which came before the internet. So I lost track with a number of people because snail mail, who writes a letter these days? But so I decided, I'd interview all aspects of the travel experience, like asking people, for example, during the interviews, well, do you have any interesting things happen to you in life or when you're traveling? And about like 5% of these were, hey, I got to tell you about this flying saucer I saw or paranormal experience. And
totally
so at the same, go ahead.
Totally unsolicited. They just brought that to you.
Yeah, because people want to tell you, especially to people who are eager to hear them and open-minded to hearing them, not going to ridicule them, be critical, and especially because I was, working through 3 degrees in psychology. I think I probably had a little bit of credibility in their eyes as somebody who'd be willing to listen to them. And so I found that not only was I interested in travel in most of my pre and adult life, but I found that I was also very, very interested in the paranormal and in the UFO thing in and of itself, because I remember maybe at the age, I'm not exactly sure when this happened, I think it was the early 1950s, when Look magazine came out with an article, and Life magazine on flying saucers. Maybe you can picture this open double-page thing with a UFO going over like the Arizona desert, wherever it was, New Mexico, near White Sands. And the big, I don't remember the title of this article, but what's with the flying saucers, that kind of thing. So I stuck with that all along, and I made the interview process my way of learning what this was all about, in addition to all kinds of aspects of travel. So I've actually researched and I'm writing in 3 areas. One is I used to do a series of traveling by public transportation. I developed 14 travel guides with big folding maps showing you how to go to the top 50 points of interest in about 14 cities, including London and Paris and Honolulu, where I was living, and Sydney, Australia, and all kinds of places in Europe, Prague, Berlin, so on and so forth. That was one series, and I did that a long time ago, and they're still around. People like them because they open up real big and show you the metro system and where points of interest are, and so on and so forth. But then I moved on to The Road to Strange. The Road to Strange, I was invited by my good friend at the time, Rosemary Ellen Guiley. And that name is going to be familiar to a lot of people because I think she was the queen of the paranormal. I think she was the most knowledgeable person I ever met on the whole range and variety of subjects in the paranormal, and including UFOs. And I met Rosemary in UFO meetings, like particularly Eureka Springs, Arkansas on occasion, and lots of them. So I knew her for years and years and years. And we were both guests at a good friend of mine's house in England, George Wingfield, who many people might remember from the UFO, from the early Crop Circle field. He was the editor of one of the Crop Circle monthlies. So Rosemary was there with her boyfriend at the time. I was there. We'd go out and look at the crop circles. And so I got to know Rosemary over the years. And she says, Michael, why don't we do a book series on UFOs and the paranormal? Because she knew I collected all kinds of interviews and knew virtually everyone in the field. And so we wrote 2 books together. One of them, and we call it The Road to Strange, which is such a great title. I remember when I was presenting a list of possible titles of the series, we both went to this Road to Strange, went, bingo, that's it. So she and I wrote 2 books together, one on UFOs and the weirdness and strangeness of that, and the other was basically on paranormal experiences people had while traveling, because I had a unique collection of these stories, even though I also had a collection of a lot of UFO stories and paranormal stories, and really the essence of what travel was all about. And why would people have more paranormal experiences maybe while traveling? So she and I wrote 2 books. She says, Michael, when you write a book, don't make it more than 240 pages. That's it. And she was a real publisher. We lost Rosemary in 2019. She and I were going to do more books together. And she's done some nice books with other publishers in the field of paranormal and UFOs as well. So we lost her, and I went on to publish 2 more books, but I violated her rule. She says, Michael, don't make a book that's more than 240 pages.
I give you the big screen so we can see those covers.
But it was all the rest of the material that she and I would have worked through, and she had plenty of her own material. So those altogether for The Road to Strange, I've published about 1,800 pages, mostly on people that I've interviewed and data I've collected. Now, I not only interviewed people like you and me and other travelers who had all sorts of travel experiences and really delved into the psychology of travel, but I kept up my pursuit of the UFO and UAP phenomena because I felt it was important always. And so I continued to publish in those series. I also have a totally independent series called the True Travel Tales series, and that's everything else, really. Although I have sections on the paranormal and the occult. For example, I'm coming out with a book on Italy in a few days, and one section of my Italy book, one section of my Paris book, one section of my London and England book are paranormal and supernatural experiences of travelers in those countries, because it's a very real part of people's experiences in lots of countries. And you can just imagine, for example, in England, we have all the crop circles, we have all these megalithic ancient places like Stonehenge. Right. I've had untold numbers of people telling me, I felt like I was here before. Someone was telling me how she was staring at the Colosseum and she was looking up at an ancient building that turns out it was like an apartment house, apartment building. They had apartment buildings then. in Rome. And she wound her way up in that area, and she met a really elderly man who said, "Come with me. I want to show you what some of this is like." And she goes up there and she says, "I've been here before. I've been here before. This is familiar." And he looks at her and he says, "I know. I know." It's like as if he singled her out. That's just an interesting, odd kind of experience. But people have these when they travel. So anyway, my publishing runs the whole gamut. And it's really based on my personal interviews with people trying to understand and appreciate why they've had these experiences, what they could possibly mean, wondering how much of this is true, how much of it is what they're imagining it to be. You know, you can never know completely, but I've had a unique, great time doing this because I can't think of anyone else that's interviewed upwards to a couple thousand people. And I've also interviewed some of ufology's greats. I interviewed J. Allen Hynek after he quit Project Blue Book, working for the Air Force, and became the de facto father of modern ufology.
Yep.
I've interviewed Jesse Marcel Jr. at the one of the McMinnville UFO conferences, annual ones, which is a great one. And he told me about his experience of his dad, the the base intelligence officer at Roswell Army Air Force Base at the time of the so-called crash at Roswell. And he went out there and brought a trunk full of stuff back, went home first. He said, "I had to wake up my wife and my child to see this." And he said to Jesse Marcel Jr., who told me in a 10-minute interview, "I saw stuff. My dad said, you'll never ever see this again. And this is not of this earth." So I feel like I've had some great opportunities to interview and meet some of the greats. I knew John Mack. I knew Bud Hopkins. They're gone. I knew David Jacobs. I still know him to this day. I know some of the greats of ufology, but there's plenty of new people who have entered into the field, and I don't all know them all, and some of them have never heard of me, but others may have. And in MUFON, I became the state director for MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, for the state of Hawaii, because that's where I went to graduate school to do my PhD in psychology, social psychology. And it was interesting because J. Allen Hynek came to Hawaii. I got him to talk to our little MUFON group there, and I interviewed him about a bunch of his great cases. And so he's one of my interviewees, and he appears in one of my books. I interviewed Stanton Friedman at one point. I've interviewed Linda Howe. I've interviewed a bunch of terrific people that I got to know and love, and get a little bit of some of their experiences for posterity. And one of the all-time UFO greats, a former NASA psychologist, Dr. Richard Haynes, lives on Whidbey Island, which is right around the corner from me here on Bainbridge Island, Washington. And I went and I visited with Dick Haynes. He's the one that I believe, and I think he didn't disagree with me, I think he invented the term UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. Why? Because he wanted to take the stigma off the subject so that scientists wouldn't be scared away from it. You know, when you talk about flying saucers, well, that suggests that you just have a very narrow point of view as to what it is, but he had a much broader point of view about the whole thing. And I think he should be credited for having come up with the term UAP. And I should be seeing him this coming summer because it's, like I say, a hop, skip, and a jump away from where I live. And we're so lucky to have him live close by. Okay, I'll be quiet now for a minute.
That's all right. And all these interviews are collected in your books. And folks, if you are interested in Dr. Brian's books, there's a link right below the video here. You can click on it anytime. Opens in a whole new window. Doesn't take you away from the interview at all. So you can be, making purchases right now. and still listening to us talk.
Let me tell you what I think you'll get from me that's a little different from other people, other than I base all of my writings on interviews that I've done with people who have had experiences. It's basically, I feel I'm one of these people, and I've met more and more of them in ufology over the years, who might have had some scientific background training like I did. I mean, I was one of these high school kind of nerdy guys, not like you guys, but I was a nerdy guy. I didn't do any of the sports in high school or college. And I got myself through the door of Carnegie Mellon, and I was going to be a chemical engineer. And then I got scared out of that. I was thinking, wait a minute, I'm nerdy, but I'm not like the rest of these people. I don't want to do that. And I left, and I came to Temple University, where I did my 2 degrees in psychology, a master's undergraduate degree and a master's degree. And they invited me to stay on to do a PhD in clinical psychology if I wanted to, but the lure, I said I was bitten in the rear end of the Ecole to go to Hawaii and create the psychology of travel. So I gave up a full 4-year fellowship, which I wouldn't have had to work a minute of my life, and I could have done my doctorate at Temple University in Philly. But I wanted to go to Hawaii so badly, and there I sat on the beach reading for my exams, reading all the psych books that you had to read in order to pass your qualifying exam. And I did that. Yeah, go ahead. It was a rough life.
I think you made the right choice. Yeah.
I did. You can always have regrets. But I thought the clinical end of psychology might be a little bit too depressing for me. It's tough thinking about just dealing with people's problems your whole life, your whole adult life. And I'm not without my own set of problems like anybody else. But I like psychology. I felt I could make a unique contribution to that, being at one and the same time a social psychologist, a social scientist who appreciates the scientific method, who interviews people, listens to people to find out what's going on, and who realized early on, and this is my main point to all this, I realized that science, as important as it is to us, including logic and the philosophy of science and the scientific method, as important as it is, I was not closed-minded to the idea that maybe, just maybe, we're still thinking in terms of earth, air, fire, and water, in terms of the whole big picture of things, that I didn't feel like the scientific community in these universities where I went to were open enough to the idea that our paradigms can expand more and more and more, and accept and take into account data from people that may be just as true and just as valid, but hard to stomach and hard to accept, especially if you're steeped into the scientific method, which is important and as good as it is, still kind of limits us. You can see it today, how people who are staunch scientists find it hard to look at some of these other bizarre phenomena that all of us are familiar with. And I think that one of my mantras in my books, especially on the psychic reader that I've done, is that if but one of these is true, what then? And I think my books are full of plenty of true accounts of people. After all, we have courts of law, and don't we put people's lives on the line when we have a small group of intelligent people having to come to some kind of decision about the truth or falsity of some horrible disaster that somebody has created, and be a judge of whether people are telling the truth or not? I think we have to give humans a little more credit than the staunch scientific types are not so willing to do. What's that?
Trust the science. All right, that's what they always tell us.
Trust but verify. Trust but expand the way you look at stuff.
Yes.
You know,
Now,
it makes sense.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Chris. I'm
oh,
going to pass it over to you. I just want to say it makes sense that people would have experiences when they travel because, you know, if you don't live in a haunted house, if you're not residing in Amityville, then the only place you're going to experience something like that is outside the house. You're going to have to go somewhere. So
Let me tell you a funny story. Let me give you a
Okay.
funny travel ghost story. And this, I'm sure everybody can appreciate this. You know, is it absolutely true? Well, I don't know. This guy was traveling with one of his buddies, maybe a college buddy, to the guy's grandmother's house in some other state. And they said, okay, the guest room is in the attic. You sleep up there. And so he goes up to this room and he walks in the room. And what does he see when he walks into this room? Walls of dolls, dolls everywhere, dolls looking at you, dolls with their eyes open, dolls with their eyes closed. Now, so he was asleep and suddenly he wakes up and he looks at a doll and he says the doll winked at him.
Oh, God. Be gone.
So what did he do? As he said, ah! He ran downstairs and he slept on a sofa downstairs. He could not stay in that room. Now, is that absolutely true? I don't know. But here's what happened to me. I lived in this isolated ranch that I owned. I had llamas. I was up on the top of a mountain just outside of Ashland, Oregon, and I had a huge, a lot of acreage and all that. And that English friend of mine, whose house I stayed in England, told you when I was looking at some of the crop circles, he and his wife at the time gave me a gift. It was a ceramic frog that would go ribbit when you went to the front door, you know, to unlock the door and go in. Ribbit. Okay. I loved my ceramic frog. And ultimately, the frog lost its voice. And I guess maybe 5 years later, having not heard its voice for some 5 years, I go up to open my door and it goes, ribbit. And it was in the trash the next day. That was the end of the ceramic frog. But that was my little experience of this. And toys that go off on their own. Toys that turn on. And this woman friend that I know, who I believe has had psychic stuff, and I was at her house when a poltergeist kind of thing happened. And it was suddenly like we're all sitting on chairs in this living room, and the dogs, several dogs are on the floor, and all of a sudden, something that looked like a 100-mile-an-hour flying sparrow zoomed through the room about a foot above the floor, didn't crash into anything, you didn't hear anything. The dogs looked in the direction of this thing. I looked in the direction of this thing, didn't see anything. And I said, Jill, what's this? Because they experienced it too. And they said, oh, it's a poltergeist. And we have some of these things happening. Well, she said she's had a couple of toys start up electronically by themselves at night. And she thought it had to do with a deceased girlfriend of hers who always had that kind of sense of humor. So, you know, I hear all these things.
I had a diorama from the Tim Burton Sleepy Hollow that had the tree and the headless horseman. And you also had the figure. You could buy this other figure separately where he was holding heads. And so I had them set up, and it turned out that you can probably see over my shoulder that I've got like displays of different figures. It turned out every other figure that I put like near the diorama would mysteriously, after a couple of like weeks or days, fall off the floor and they would lose their head.
Oh,
and it seemed, and also the figure, the headless horseman figure itself, would turn a little bit if it was standing.
So, who's causing it? What's causing it? I don't know, but it happens.
Exactly.
And there's enough people witnessing this to know if but one of these things is true, what then? Which is one of my mantras. Another mantra I've had with all these interviews I've done is when a person says to me, I know what I saw. I know what I saw. I know what I saw, damn it. Because they're vehement.
We had that experience in one of our last houses. My wife was in my son's room and putting clothes away. And he's got one of these pirate ship beds. I mean, it was like, it's big plastic thing. It's up off the ground. And she said she was putting clothes away, and this big gray object about the size of a Cocker Spaniel jumped out of the bed over the end and ran around the other side. And she's like, okay, I've got spots in front of my eyes, it's like floaters or something. Except that when she's dismissing it, immediately my 8-year-old son said, what the hell was that? And they both ran around the other side of the bed, and there was nothing there. It was just this.
And we've all seen Paranormal Caught on Camera.
Yep.
The TV series.
Fake, but,
some of it, but some of them are things that people kind of ghost images. It seems like of pets and dogs and things like that they think they might have been seeing. Rosemary Ellen Guiley had her own personal experience in Gettysburg. She went with some people. They stayed in a bed and breakfast, and they were looking at the windows of this bed and breakfast she was in. And all of a sudden, she said she saw the reflection of what looked like a little boy and a little girl, kind of in period clothing. And people had been saying one of the mornings when they were gathered at breakfast, who was moving furniture around upstairs? Was that you, Rosemary? And Rosemary said, no, I thought it was you. They all had this kind of experience. And I thought that there was validity to this. I saw the photos, and I thought that you could really make out the figures of a little boy, little girl on the the window as you looked at it. So interesting. It is interesting. It's fascinating.
Now, since you have a specialty in the psychology of travel, that leads me to a question. When someone is traveling, I'm more sort of like international travel, because they're sort of going on an adventure, because they're traveling to a different country, a little bit of culture shock, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Do you think that leaves that person a little more, quote unquote, open to observing or witnessing either like UAP phenomenon or some sort of paranormal experience, because they're in sort of like a different culture and just kind of like taking everything in?
Yes, I'll tell you why. It's kind of like my Psychology 101 lecture to people. This is what I feel like I've gleaned from my studies, and I never really heard anybody else say this. So I think it's come from my work. And that is, do you remember the Pyramid of Human Needs by Abraham Maslow? We've all had that in our beginning psych course. And it shows at the bottom of the pyramid are your basic survival needs, security, love, dealing with fear. And as you move up towards the top, you get to self-actualizing, knowledge, learning, being all that you can be. And most of the time when we're home, we don't, dealing with our everyday lives, we don't have the opportunity as much to allow new stimuli in so we could address, try things out that are new, do all this kind of stuff. And I feel that travel approaches the solving of these higher order, satisfying these higher order needs in two directions. One from the bottom up, meaning that, you're in a different environment. I'm not saying you're fearful, but you need to pay attention to things more. You have to be more aware. Safety and security is there, whether you want to think about it or not, because you're in a different situation. It's not your everyday thing. You're not unconscious about it. You have to be, and you are, even though you're not always conscious of it, try to be more aware. The violation of that happens when you get pickpocketed at the Rome train station terminal because you're not paying attention to pickpockets because you're not expecting it. You're bringing your own. You're running on 4 cylinders instead of all your cylinders until you get accommodating and used to that. So I found I've had certain paranormal experiences myself that were fearful as they happened as I was traveling. And I think that's part of that. Now, the other end of it is we all like to try out new things, try out new faces, put on different hats, be an actor trying out a new role. Why? Because it's exciting, and this is the quickest and the best way to learn new and be exposed to new experiences. So you're open, and at the same time, it's exciting that you get rewarded for new experiences that you're successful with. So you get that roof over your head, you get that meal, you meet new people and you interact with them, maybe more than you might do when you're at home. And guess what? You're basically having a really good experience, and that's rewarding. And there's nothing like learning new things and being rewarded for it. And the punishments are fewer and far between. But there are punishments, and some travel is dangerous. Yeah. And some people are having dangerous experiences. And I feel like I'm becoming a pariah about some kinds of travel in some places, which we don't have to go into too much here. But I find that some places are a little more dangerous for solo women travelers traveling by themselves. Yeah. And so travel can be a little more dangerous than you'd like it to be. But I feel like I need to reveal to people what others have shared with me of where they were in danger and how mostly they were successful in extricating themselves from the danger of close calls. But it does happen. And I feel like I've developed a little bit of the psychology of travel, including travel tips that help you to be more safe and more secure. So I feel like, okay, I might be the pariah. Maybe I better not go to Mexico alone by myself. And maybe I better be real careful and look behind my back more in Italy when I'm traveling around, or North Africa.
They might not like you for saying, hey, don't come here. You're driving over
but I'm doing it. I'm saying it. I'm saying this is what's happened to these women. I'm sorry, but I'm going to tell you the truth. This has happened to some of them, and I think you should know it. But on the other hand, mostly it won't happen to you, but you need to think about these things. So I happen to be writing the last story I'm putting in my Italy book, which is a woman whose daughter was robbed 3 times in Rome. And I've interviewed a guy that used to be a correspondent for Newsweek, where he was robbed, pickpocketed, and mugged 4 times in Rome. Because I think you have to tell people they have to run on all cylinders. And so there's the good, the wonderful, and the bad and the horrible. So I do include some of that. And in the paranormal, there's the scary. It's mostly, if there's anything, it might be more fear and fright and scariness than anything horrible happening to you. But I mean, certainly I have stories of people who have had, and they don't realize it, or maybe they don't want to really talk about it. I remember one instance of a woman and a friend of hers, male friend of hers, that had dinner. This was somewhere in Colorado. They went to a hot springs after dinner, about 8:30 in the evening or so. They went to a hot pool, and they sat down on one side of that hot pool, like a hot tub. It's kind of maybe concrete and stone, whatever. And they saw a really bright light overhead. Oh, what's this? And the next thing they know is they're sitting on the other side of that hot pool. and it's hours later. I think they've had a classic abduction experience.
I think so.
I said to her, do you want to learn any more about this, possibly? She says, I don't know if I want to or not. But she suspects that she might have had a typical Bud Hopkins kind of abduction experience. Maybe, maybe not. But there are people that I talked to who've had scary stuff happening. Now, she is one of 40 people, 40 or 42, including myself, who I featured in one of my books called The Contiguous Universe, which really was a collection of about 40 of us who have had multiple experiences, whether paranormal and or UFO experiences, as compared to this book, which I'll quickly flash to you, which is A Road to Strange, a psychic reader. And this is more of a hodgepodge of a collection of the different sorts of paranormal experiences that have come out through my interviews over these years.
So Dr. Brein, collecting all these interviews and coming at it from an academic standpoint, looking for commonalities, did you see different kinds of overlap? And what I mean by different kinds of overlap is obviously, hey, I'm hearing the same story again from somebody who's not related to the first time I heard this story, but also overlaps not necessarily in specific places, but in specific types of places and to specific types of personalities. Like, yeah, this always seems to happen to a person who's a type A, single woman traveling alone.
Yeah, you're asking a lot of phenomenally interesting questions, and I have to say basically yes, 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 and yes.
Okay.
But I'm saying, for example, in England, being that a lot of Americans have ancestors from the UK, because we have a preponderance of English-speaking ancestors. I could see where a lot of them felt drawn to the UK and Ireland and felt a kind of connection once they were there of feeling like this, that they could relate to it. Now, psychological types of people, well, mainly, like I say, I've done interviews with a huge background in psychology. I could see certain things about people that I would tend to draw out in the interviews. An interesting one was a couple, husband and wife, that went to France to look at stained glass in particular. And I determined from talking with them, and I'd have these epiphanies on occasion, not always, but suddenly it seemed to me it's not just about the stained glass, it's really about ancestral connections. Deeper than that. It went further than that. I had another series, another interesting interview, which just blew me away. And it blew the interviewee away when he read this, because I didn't expect that this was going to come out. But what it was is he was in India and they were looking for tigers in this group. So one night in the middle of the night, the guide yells, come on, they're tigers. They're tigers. We're going to see the tigers. And they're all practically barefoot going through these forests, going towards these tigers. Why anybody would do such a thing, especially in the middle of the night. But, that's another thing I've learned is you can't necessarily rely on people saying they're experts. Blah, blah, blah. So they get to this hide, which is like 4 by 8 feet. And it's like 10 or 12 people stuffed into this. And there's 2 huge tigers out there eating a goat. So they weren't interested in anything else that was going on. But one of the tigers started walking towards the blind because it heard something. And of course, they all file out of there, the guides being the first one to run. And they go out the back end of this hide and they take off and they disappear. Well, here was the interesting thing. The last one left was the guy I was interviewing. And he wasn't really scared of the tiger. It turns out he was more scared of being in this hide, unable to extricate himself from the hide safely, because as a kid, he was locked up in a trunk by his older sister and a brother, and they let him out after a while, but he was terrified of being in the trunk. So here was a guy who wasn't so much terrified of the tiger as he was of the idea of being stuck in a trunk and locked in, claustrophobia, that he said he left out. He was the last one to leave the hide and jogged slowly back to camp, where these other people, no one was hurt, because basically the tigers had a goat, they were eating. I don't think they were, maybe the one was a little curious of the sounds. But yes, I've had epiphanies listening to people telling me these stories, and once in a while, not all the time, but every so often, enough that it got me going, because I love this experience, these epiphanies of listening to people and what happened to them as a result of these experiences, stuff that I heard from people that I don't think anybody else has ever heard. I remember one woman going up to the top of a hotel in Athens, looking at the Acropolis at night, all lit up and everything, and saying to her son or whoever it was she was with, she's standing at the edge of this hotel, she says, "My God, I've lost my fear of heights." She suddenly realized she was on top of this building, looking down, looking at the Acropolis, and it's like somebody throwing away their crutches. Now, I've had stories about the gurus in India. I've had stories of people who have had miraculous healings, or they've witnessed it. John of God, have you heard of him? John of God in Brazil, who had this reputation of being a healer, but he was arrested in the United States. And, there's still people, doctors and medical people, that swear to it, that he's for real. But I've had so many epiphanies, and I know I've had some epiphanies in ufology as well, along the line, listening to people's experiences.
I think I have heard of John of God. Is he the guy? I'm going to say, is he the guy who did this? Like, this is how he pulled off the trick, but had the chicken blood and the bits of rubber balloon and would do the psychic surgery on people.
There were psychic surgeons who had these reputations. I don't think he might have been. I don't think anybody really accused him of doing that. But I mean, he did stuff like that. He was like a psychic surgeon, but it got more complicated, and there was lots of people, lots of witnesses. But Sai Baba, for example, have you heard of Sai Baba?
No.
The famous Indian guru in the 80s or early 90s. He was known for manifesting gems in his hand to people, and rings.
Yes.
Things like that. And there's all kinds of stories, and there were absolute people who believed every bit of it, and some often educated, some scientists, people, types of all kinds of people. So I'm not quite sure myself of what I thought of him, but he certainly had a lot of good deeds and affected a lot of good people with a lot of interesting things, and they'll swear to it. Yeah, go ahead.
I come at this from two different polar extremes, I guess. One is that I think this really, really interesting universe that we haven't fully explored yet, which has psychic phenomenon and UAPs and other races that we haven't discovered yet. And at the other end of the spectrum, I'm like, James Randi has a $1 million check that nobody's cashed yet.
I agree totally, but I expand on that a little bit, and I maintain when I do talks like this, I say I still see ourselves as pretty much in a fishbowl, and we're at the level of the goldfish in the bowl, and don't have one iota of a hint of what lies beyond that. So, for example, what percentage of the universe do we understand? Do we even understand 1%? Do we understand 20%? I asked that to a lot of highly educated people, and I personally feel we're around the 1% or 2% mark, if that we just don't have the tools as a goldfish yet to look beyond that. But I do see our paradigms expanding ever so slightly. And one good example of that in ufology is in the early days of MUFON. Walter Andrus, who started MUFON, was of the opinion we're only looking at nuts and bolts here. Don't talk to me about abductions. Don't talk to me about this weird stuff. And as we moved on, MUFON began to be a little bit more open to the possibilities of, okay, we're not there yet. We don't really understand this stuff yet. We may not have the tools to understand it yet. I don't know. Okay, maybe the universe is all of consciousness, but I'm not sure I understand that yet, or we, or MUFON, or anybody else. So part of my lecture is the expanding worldview and paradigm shift, and that maybe that's why they don't land on the White House lawn, is because the true paradigm shift takes place at the level of 100 monkeys, the group consciousness level, where it just expands ever so slightly. Nobody may believe landing on the White House lawn or not. I don't know. But anyway, that's my take on it, in addition to what you're saying.
Now, you had given you gave an anecdote about the Colosseum in Rome and having sort of I guess a deja vu moment, or the person you were speaking of, and you were also talking about ancestral connection. Is that sort of like a universal theme that you have found when speaking to different people about like the experiences that they've had with like the deja vu? I mean, are they feeling sort of like an ancestral connection, or is it?
Yes. The short answer is yes. Many. I have no doubt in my mind have in back of their minds, or maybe not even aware of it, the possibility. Some people seem like they've been drawn to countries. So, for example, I have a story. One of the people featured in my 40 or so collection of people who, in the Contiguous Universe book, I call her story Jane of Arc, because she seemed drawn to a number of places in Europe, including France. Now, I'm not saying she was Joan of Arc, but she had these interesting connections, which seemed to be ancestral, not only in France, but other places. And here's what's interesting. She was a Berkeley graduate. She was a really smart lady. And I remember another woman who was a graduate of one of these fancy schmancy New England, really good colleges. And she was talking about how she and her husband, she staunchly believed, played a role in walking between two of the more famous Mexican pyramids in that area of Mexico where those sun and the moon pyramids were. And she felt that they had the duty of climbing up to these tops of these two pyramids, which was exhausting for them. They almost couldn't do it. It was raining and they were suffering. And she feels that it was a draw. They had to climb these pyramids. I don't, how can we possibly evaluate the veracity of it? But she was not lying about it. In her heart of hearts, she believed that happened to her. I had a guy from Eureka Springs who used to live there with his wife that were among my best friends there. And I used to stay with them sometimes when I came to the Eureka Springs UFO conferences. He felt that he had an experience at a Hawaiian heiau where like a wind tornado. Have either of you been to Hawaii?
I have not.
Unfortunately, no.
Apparently, these water spouts with little tornadoes that happen out over the ocean. Well, this water spout suddenly came in while he was at this forbidden heiau, which was a temple worship place, that he was not supposed to be up there, that, apparently so close to it. And he got hit by a pebble in this thing. It was just sort of knocked him for a loop. He didn't get hurt, but he said, and he was a very spiritual guy, and he said out loud, "Why are you treating me with such disdain when I'm one of the more religiously oriented, spiritual people that will be here doing this, coming to you? Why do you treat me like this?" And I suggested to him, "Well, they didn't really injure you, did they?" And he said, "No, but it sure hurt for a minute and knocked me for a loop." And I said, maybe that is a bit of tough love, letting you know that this was such a holy place, and you're the white haole guy coming to the ancient Hawaiian community. I'm not saying there's racial prejudice there, but maybe he wanted to knock the fear of God into you slightly. And that no, it wasn't meant to insult you, but it was meant for you to be saying what you're saying right now. And I thought, wow, my God, that come out of my mouth. And I thought, whoa, well, I like that. Now, I don't know if it's how true it is, but it's certain. And I said, yeah, that looks good, because nobody else, his wife or his son that was there, and his grandson, nobody else had the pebble happen. It was just him. And I thought, that's as good an explanation as any that I can think of that maybe happened to him. So I think, in answer to your question, I think people are drawn as part of the travel experience, the openness, a sense of fulfillment, and wanting to identify and reconnect maybe with ancestry is at work with some people. To as true as that is, or as much as we can understand at our, let's just say, relatively superficial levels of grasping this, I think there's some truth to it, but I can't swear up and down. And that's why I want to give credit to Stanton Friedman, who I respected a lot, and I knew him, and I interviewed Stanton. And he had this simple little concept of the gray basket. Do you all know what his gray basket was? Do you recall that from his lectures? Well, the gray basket was where you would temporarily park a theory about something, an idea. You don't have to decide whether it really happened or not, but you park it in the gray basket for the time being, go back, relook at it. So I have a lot of stuff that goes in and out of the gray baskets temporarily, or go back into the gray basket. And I find I can be open, I can be scientific, I can appreciate science and philosophy and logic, but at the same time, I can accept the notion of a gray basket, that there's things I don't understand, but I'll park them temporarily in a mental space where I could draw upon those at any time and take a relook at it. So that's what I think I've come from all this work I've done in travel psychology and ufology and a study of the paranormal. I can allow myself the freedom to expand my worldview ever so slightly as things will, come to be more understandable or more comprehensible, and realize that neither I nor maybe any other living being present in the near future, we may never ever really fully grasp things. And so hundreds of years, who knows? Who knows whether when and ever we'll be ready to really understand what this whole UFO phenomenon is all about, who these beings seem to be. Are they other citizens of the universe? Are they other dimensions? Are there just other kinds of existences that we just don't have a concept of? That's where I'm at, and that's what I'm trying to convey in my look at things from my writing research.
We've talked a couple of times, and Christopher brought this up, the feeling of being drawn to a place. And it makes me wonder, if this doesn't give credence to less of a reincarnation kind of theory, less of a spiritual thing, but a more scientific one, and that would be like memory passed on via genetics. Because, you have people who several, generations passed, and they're like, oh, you look just like your great-great-grandfather because finally the genes came back together. So maybe,
I like that. I think that's terrific. I think that's a terrific concept. And I think it's sort of another analogy to what you're saying, and I totally agree with you, is the idea, the Inuit, they typically have 30 words for snow or whatever, so many more concepts of snow and ice and all these things in the cold and freezing Arctic that we just have sleet, ice, snow. We don't have the breadth of concepts, but we will. It's going to expand. We made it. How far are we going to go? But yeah, I think there's ways of looking at the so-called past life things in ways that we just don't have the scope of understanding to lay out a map. Alfred Korzybski, something like that.
It's easy for you to say.
Korzybski. He was the founder of general semantics. That was something that I learned a little bit. I took a couple of courses at Temple University in general semantics. And there was a famous guy, Harry Weinberg, who was really known for general semantics. And that was basically the idea, the map is not the territory. Our conceptions of the universe is not exactly what's out there. We're just overlaying this intellectual conception, consciousness conception of what is, and to the extent to which our conceptions of it map the reality, that's the big gap. And who knows how far we're ever going to get and what we're going to know, but we're certainly going to learn more as time goes on.
There's an anecdote about the quote unquote Kentucky goblins. And you've got that phrasing, which gives you sort of like a folkloric kind of hook to the thing. Oh, goblins, that sort of thing. And it turns out that once you get more into the anecdote and the experience of the people that went through this in Kentucky, it turns out that it was definitely sort of like an alien encounter, as opposed to sort of like a kind of a goblin kind of preconceived notion that we have. And in fact, there were it also goes back into maybe a base that the aliens had within some cave system near where this person was living. And so
Hopkinsville, I think.
Overlay of kind of like the folklore tropes. And then you've got, the unidentified, like alien encounters, that sort of thing. How does one kind of like, separate the kind of, this is like a folklore kind of urban legend thing from like, oh, actually, you know what? This is really, really something to look at. And we should be, taking this a little more seriously than just, calling it the Kentucky Goblins.
Bingo. Because I say bingo because I think it was Hopkinsville or something like that, Kentucky, the Skinwalker Ranch stuff. That is being brought into such currency and relevance these days. Some of these U.S. government organizations, the Defense Intelligence Agency is one in particular, and numbers of people that were involved in government and with Bob Bigelow's efforts when he bought the Skinwalker and then he sold it, and this new guy owns the Skinwalker, and they had teams of scientists over there, and they were seeing strange entities. I remember I'm reading Skinwalker at the Pentagon right now, and they had this dinosaur-looking thing with things on its back and all kinds of stuff. And again, the minute we try to label it either folklore or dinosaurs or past lives, we don't have the vocabulary yet to depict what's going on in the ranch, the reality, that we don't have a good way to create a map of that reality. And what's so fascinating about the Skinwalker is that they had teams of scientists looking at it, and what do they walk away with? just about virtually the only thing they can walk away with is their own personal experiences of it and very little useful scientific data, because whatever the phenomena or phenomenon is was mucking around with them and destroying these cameras and really not letting them walk away with real useful data in a scientific sense that helps depict that map, that we can understand what's going on there. And I agree with you. Hopkinsville, or whatever that was, Kentucky, is a great example. It's a really good example of that. Another example. I'd like to use that example. That's a good one.
We have crossed the hour mark here. So, Christopher, do you have any other questions you want to throw out there?
And that, let's see. I was just going to say, if one last question. Do you think, because we don't necessarily have like the descriptive vocabulary or the technological advances, do you think that we'll get the technological advances to sort of come up with more scientific, I guess you would say solid data to back up some of these encounters and anecdotes, kind of separate them from sort of like the urban legends, or like the you were saying the MUFA, I believe it was the organization, and that was saying, let's get rid of the weird stuff, let's go to the nuts and bolts. And that, do you see this type of research heading in that direction, so it's getting a little bit more legitimized?
The short answer I would give to that is yes, but I'd like to kind of refer to the famous or infamous Drake equation. The old Drake equation was basically had all these factors that you would take into account to try and calculate how many intelligent civilizations are out there. One of those factors, I'm thinking is L, but I don't know for sure. One of those factors was the length of a civilization will make it to. In other words, is it a characteristic? Are we going to learn a fact of civilizations is that most, if not all, ultimately come and self-destruct or go out of business before they learn a certain extent of how to survive and get beyond all that? How many years of Earth civilizations do we need before we get to that critical mark of 39%, whatever it is, of knowledge to understand and appreciate what's going on? That's a good question, but I agree with you that I think the short answer is yes, we're going to learn a lot more. I can't wait to see in 1,000 years. I hope some of us are around with consciousness. I'd like to see 1,000 years from now where the iPhone has advanced to. To this day, I don't think Albert Einstein or Enrico Fermi or Drake, whatever his first name was, probably would know what to do, how to even turn the iPhone on, let alone figure out how it works. I would love to be around to see where we're at 1,000,000 years hence. I think some of these entities we're interacting with are could even be 1,000,000,000 years beyond where we are. Can we ever hope to get to these levels? And then all the different ones that are around. My God, some are way advanced over others. Bud Hopkins used to say, and I knew him personally, he used to say, sometimes a couple of boys in the neighborhood would be abducted and they come back wearing each other's clothes by mistake. Like some of these so-called entities were making mistakes, that they're fallible. So maybe they're only a few hundred years ahead of us, or a few thousand, or a few million. It's anybody's guess. I don't know. Where do we, the three of us, the listening audience, where do we go from here when we can only see little bits and little pieces and little chunks of this stuff?
We barely make it. We barely make it to the big rock that's circling our planet, and we only do that like.
Will they let us into kindergarten? Will we be let into kindergarten?
All right, so
I'll leave with that thought.
Well, my final question is, since this is on the psychology of travel, and the psychology of travel has encompassed both UAP and paranormal events.
They're connected.
I know they're connected. I'm separating them for ease of use at the moment. If I get the books, where I plan my itinerary, where do I go to have the best chance of a UAP experience? Where do I go for the best chance of some sort of paranormal experience?
Wow. Almost anywhere else.
Okay.
Just put yourself in a totally new environment, but don't plan on having a paranormal experience. You have to be open and receptive and firing on all cylinders and, receptive, more open to the universe. And these things may happen to you, but don't spend your last dollar on trying to design an experience of where to go and have it. Oh, okay, you could wander off in the national parks, but I don't want you to fall into the situation of David Paulides 411. I don't want you to walk into a portal and never get back. I don't want to be the cause of you going off. I think if you are generally more receptive and the travel puts you into that frame of mind more, you may be more likely to have some experience that will dovetail and gel with your makeup, your psyche. But to self-design it, I'll be a self-made millionaire, billionaire type if I could say, okay, everybody, step right up and come to my website and let me create a paranormal experience for you. That would be nice. I cannot do it.
Well, I was going to say,
only you can do it.
Once you can do it, it's no longer paranormal. I mean, once it's repeatable, that fulfills the request of science that something be repeatable with the same results. It's no longer paranormal. It's normal.
And we're going to get to that. We're probably going to get there more. I think going to all these UFO conferences that I've gone to all these people and interviewing all these people in my traveling life and my ufology and paranormal life, that's why I've had it dovetails. I've had a lifetime of my own paranormal experiences, and they're in my book, The Contiguous Universe. I'm one of my own subjects, and I think my travel experience has created more of that for me personally, but I can't swear that will work for everybody. But keep on keeping on.
All right. Everybody who's listening, and if you're watching this on the replay, it's still true. The link to Dr. Brian's books are below this video, the very first link in the description. Please follow that and check through the different volumes.
And I welcome an email. I welcome hearing from readers with questions or other experiences that you've had for future books, or just to converse or have emails over. I welcome it, and I look for it. I love listening and talking to people. So this has been really a great experience. I've enjoyed this. Especially, I've enjoyed my time with you guys.
We've been happy to have you, and blessed by your presence, sir. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation to come on and talk.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Everybody in the chat, thank you for being here. We don't have a show without you. We're just a podcast falling in the woods otherwise. And as we say on our channel all the time, while you were here, we just hope you had a blast. Good night.